Imagine the weight of a silence that feels more like an impending storm than actual peace. It was the Sabbath, the day after the most significant crucifixion in the history of the world. The religious leaders who orchestrated the crucifixion were breathing a momentary sigh of relief. The man who had challenged their absolute authority, the Galilean who ate with tax collectors and sinners, was finally dead. But this quietness in the high echelons of power had nothing sacred about it. It was a heavy silence. The high priests remembered the disturbing words of the man they had just condemned. He had clearly stated that after 3 days he would rise. This memory gnawed at their minds, disturbing the peace of their holy day. The Gospel of Matthew narrates that the chief priests and Pharisees went to Pilate on Saturday, violating the spirit of the very sacred day they claimed to defend, to ask for a guard to seal the tomb. They demanded Roman soldiers to secure the heavy stone. They did everything human power could possibly do to ensure that a finished story remained permanently finished. They did not know they were guarding the tomb of someone who had created the very concept of a guard. Jerusalem was a city of monumental wealth and rigid religious structures. The Temple of Herod dominated the horizon, with foundation stones weighing over 400 tons and a main portal coated in pure gold. It was the ultimate symbol of their absolute power. The high priests walked through these magnificent courtyards, smelling the incense and the blood of the sacrifices, feeling secure behind walls that were 12 meters high and 6 meters thick. They believed their carefully constructed world was completely invincible. But real power doesn't reside in colossal stones or political maneuvering. As the sun began to set on that Sabbath, the high priests had no idea that their entire religious system was about to be irreversibly shattered by an empty grave. Imagine waking up to the news that your flawless political plan has completely unraveled overnight. It was Sunday morning, and the massive stone at the tomb had already been removed, and nobody knew exactly how. The elite guards, specifically placed to prevent any theft, had failed catastrophically. The Gospel of Matthew narrates that some of the soldiers went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened, including the appearance of an angel whose appearance was like lightning and clothing white as snow. The seasoned Roman soldiers themselves had been paralyzed, falling like dead men out of sheer terror. The religious leaders faced an unprecedented crisis that threatened their very existence. They had the political motive to present the body of Jesus to definitively stop the spreading message, but they could never do so because there was simply no body to present. The tomb was entirely empty. Desperation quickly set in. The chief priests, after consulting with the elders, gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, instructing them to say that the disciples came during the night and stole the body while they slept. This was a fabricated lie with an obvious logical problem. If the soldiers were fast asleep, how could they possibly know it was the disciples who took the body? Yet, this desperate lie was enough to circulate among the Jewish people, and it spread widely until the day the texts were written. The high priest's authority was now hanging by a fragile thread of expensive deception. While the colossal, complex machinery of urban life in Jerusalem kept turning as if nothing had changed, merchants opening stalls and priests fulfilling ancient rituals, a silent revolution was brewing beneath their feet. The very foundation of their power, built on fear and strict religious compliance, was cracking irreparably. They had paid handsomely for a cover-up, but no amount of silver could purchase the silence of a truth that had just defeated death itself. Imagine the psychological torment of fighting a ghost that is actually alive and walking among your people. Over the next 40 days, the high priests tried to maintain the illusion of absolute control, completely unaware of what was unfolding behind locked doors. While the religious leaders who orchestrated the crucifixion still held formal political power, Jesus was meticulously preparing a group of terrified people to change the entire world. In a locked room in Jerusalem, where the smell of fear still lingered heavily in the air, Jesus appeared to his disciples without opening a single door or window. He decisively replaced their blinding terror with divine authority, breathing the Holy Spirit upon them. The high priest's vast network of spies could not penetrate these sacred, quiet moments. The religious elite continued their daily temple sacrifices, entirely unaware that the true Passover lamb was standing alive, bearing the deep scars of his crucifixion not as marks of defeat, but as glorious insignias of a war he had fought alone and won for all humanity. Jesus spent these crucial 40 days healing deep traumas and providing undeniable physical proof that he was real, even eating roasted fish in front of everyone. He connected the complex dots of the ancient scriptures, showing exactly how the sacrificial system the high priests blindly defended actually pointed directly to him. The high priests arrogantly thought the leaderless disciples would scatter and vanish. Instead, men like Peter, who had bitterly denied Jesus 3 times by a fire, were being beautifully restored by the resurrected Christ by a warm charcoal fire on a beach in Galilee. The leaders had ruthlessly severed the shepherd from the sheep, assuming the terrified flock would die out. But the good shepherd, who knows his sheep intimately by name, had returned. Every single day that passed within those 40 days sealed the inevitable downfall of the corrupt religious establishment. Imagine the precise moment when entrenched arrogance slowly transforms into inevitable ruin. The pivotal 40 days concluded, and the disciples emerged entirely transformed. The religious leaders had proudly witnessed the crucifixion, a slow and deeply humiliating Roman death that could brutally last for hours or even days. They believed they had decisively won the cultural and spiritual war. But the broken men who had hidden behind locked doors, terrified that the exact same gruesome fate awaited them, were suddenly standing in public squares declaring boldly what they had seen. The high priests could not comprehend this radical psychological shift. They did not understand that a resurrected man had physically shown them his pierced hands and feet, specifically asking for food to prove beyond any doubt he was not a mere spirit. The religious leaders had paid a fortune for a convenient lie, but the disciples possessed an untouchable experiential truth. They had walked dusty roads with him, shared intimate meals, and touched his physical wounds. The foundation of the high priest's earthly power was built on massive stones and ancient rituals, but it was rotting rapidly from the inside out. Decades later, the ultimate catastrophic consequence of their internal spiritual blindness would physically manifest. In the year 70 AD, the magnificent city of Jerusalem, which boasted the thickest walls in the Middle East and was fiercely protected by zealots, would be entirely erased from the map by a methodical Roman general. True destruction rarely comes exclusively from the outside. It almost always begins quietly within. The bitter internal division, the stubborn pride that refused any peaceful negotiation, and the horrific violence between brothers would consume the city from the inside. The breathtaking temple of Herod, laboriously built over 46 years, would tragically turn to glowing ashes in a single August afternoon. The high priests laid the very groundwork for this devastating collapse when they chose political convenience over truth. Imagine standing helplessly before the smoldering ashes of an empire you firmly thought would last forever. 40 years after the religious leaders betrayed Jesus, the devastating prophecy he solemnly spoke on the Mount of Olives was fulfilled to the absolute letter. He had wept openly over the city, warning that ruthless enemies would build trenches, surround them entirely, and leave not one stone upon another. In 70 AD, The pragmatic Roman soldiers literally dismantled the colossal stones of the temple one by one to meticulously recover the melted gold that had seeped into the crevices during the massive fire. The high priest's glorious earthly legacy was completely annihilated. The golden menorah and the sacred temple vessels were paraded off to Rome as military trophies. But what about the lasting legacy of the quiet Galilean man they crucified? The powerful message that miraculously emerged from that locked upper room in Acts 1 reached the very ends of the earth. It was translated into thousands of languages, whispered in dark prison cells, and tattooed on human skin. The religious elite desperately tried to bury the living truth under a massive stone, but the ultimate eternal victory belongs unequivocally to the empty tomb. The power that truly changes the course of human history is never held by those who orchestrate corrupt executions or pay bribes to hide the truth, but by those who faithfully carry the message of life. The tragic fall of the high priests teaches us a devastatingly clear and timeless lesson. What ultimately destroys a life, a family, or a nation always starts from within. Have you ever faced a dark situation where a closed door or a sealed tomb seemed like the absolute end, only to discover a miraculous new beginning? What do you deeply think is the greatest internal enemy a person can carry today? Tell me in the comments below. I want to read every single answer. If this immersive journey touched your heart today, please subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video. Imagine waking up to the sudden, terrifying realization that your flawless political strategy has completely unraveled overnight. It was Sunday morning, and the massive stones sealing the tomb had been violently removed. The elite temple guards, specifically positioned to prevent any theft, had failed catastrophically. The Gospel of Matthew narrates that some of these seasoned soldiers ran into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened, including the blinding appearance of an angel descending like lightning. These hardened men, trained for brutal combat, had been completely paralyzed, falling like dead men out of sheer, unadulterated terror. The religious leaders, particularly Caiaphas, faced an unprecedented crisis that threatened their very existence. They had the ultimate political motive to present the physical body of Jesus, to definitively stop his rapidly spreading message, but they could never do so because there was simply no body to present. The tomb was entirely, inexplicably empty. Desperation quickly set in. The chief priests, after frantically consulting with the elders, gave a massive sum of silver to the soldiers, instructing them to spread a fabricated rumor that the disciples came during the night and stole the body while they slept. This was a desperate lie with a glaring, fatal flaw. If the guards were truly fast asleep, how could they possibly know it was the disciples who took the body? Yet, this fragile deception was enough to circulate among the people, temporarily masking the terrifying truth. The high priest's absolute authority was now hanging by a very thin thread of expensive deception. While the complex, noisy machinery of urban life in Jerusalem kept turning merchants opening their stalls, priests slaughtering the morning sacrifices, a silent revolution was brewing beneath their feet. The very foundation of their power, built entirely on fear, political maneuvering, and strict religious compliance, was cracking irreparably. They had paid handsomely for a cover-up, but they would soon discover that no amount of silver in the temple treasury could purchase the silence of a truth that had just defeated death itself. Imagine the profound psychological torment of desperately fighting a ghost that is, in reality, fully alive and breathing right under your nose. Over the next 40 tense days, the high priests fought to maintain the fragile illusion of absolute control, completely blind to the silent revolution unfolding behind locked doors. While Caiaphas and the religious elite clung to their formal political power, meticulously performing their daily temple duties, Jesus was quietly preparing a group of terrified fugitives to permanently change the world. In a dimly lit, locked room in Jerusalem, where the sour smell of fear still lingered heavily in the air, Jesus appeared to his disciples without opening a single door. He didn't just offer comforting words, he decisively replaced their blinding terror with divine authority. The high priest's vast, well-funded network of informants could not penetrate these sacred, quiet moments. The religious elite blindly continued their daily, bloody temple sacrifices, entirely unaware that the true, ultimate Passover lamb was standing alive in their very city. He bore the deep scars of his Roman crucifixion, not as shameful marks of defeat, but as glorious insignias of a cosmic war he had fought alone and conclusively won. Jesus spent these crucial 40 days doing the most careful work of his earthly ministry, healing deep emotional traumas and providing undeniable physical proof that he was not an apparition. He ate roasted fish right in front of them, an action a pure spirit simply cannot do. He intricately connected the ancient Hebrew scriptures, showing how the rigid sacrificial system the high priests so fiercely defended pointed directly to him. The high priests arrogantly assumed the leaderless disciples would quickly scatter back to their fishing boats and vanish into historical obscurity. Instead, broken men like Peter, who had bitterly denied Jesus 3 times by a courtyard fire, were being beautifully restored by the resurrected Christ next to a warm charcoal fire on the misty shores of the Sea of Galilee. Every passing day silently sealed the inevitable, catastrophic downfall of Caiaphas's corrupt religious empire. Imagine the exact and chilling moment when deeply rooted arrogance transforms, slowly but inescapably, into inevitable ruin. The 40 crucial days came to an end, and the disciples emerged from that upper room completely transformed. Caiaphas and the remaining religious leaders had proudly witnessed the crucifixion, a Roman death designed to be slow, excruciating, and deeply humiliating, engineered to break not only the body but also the spirit. They firmly believed they had decisively won the ultimate cultural, political, and spiritual war. But those same broken men, who had hidden behind locked doors, terrified that the same bloody fate awaited them, were suddenly standing in the public squares of Jerusalem, declaring with supernatural boldness what they had seen and experienced. The high priests could not, by any means, comprehend such a radical psychological shift. They did not understand that a resurrected man had physically shown them his pierced hands and feet, specifically asking for broiled fish to prove, without any shadow of a doubt, that he was not a mere floating spirit. The leaders of the Sanhedrin had paid a true fortune from the temple treasury for a convenient lie, but the disciples possessed an experiential and untouchable truth. They had traveled dusty roads with him, shared intimate meals, and touched his physical wounds. The imposing foundation of the high priest's earthly power was built upon massive 400-ton stones and ancient rituals, but it was rotting rapidly from the inside out. Decades later, the final catastrophic consequence of their internal spiritual blindness would manifest physically before the world, just as Jesus had prophesied. In the year 70 AD, the magnificent city of Jerusalem, which boasted the thickest walls in the Middle East, would be completely wiped off the map by the methodical Roman general Titus. True destruction rarely comes exclusively from the outside. It almost always begins, silently and lethally, inside the soul. Bitter internal division, stubborn pride that refused any peaceful negotiation, and horrific violence between brothers would consume the city from within long before the Roman legions attacked. Herod's stunning temple, laboriously built over more than 4 decades, would tragically turn into wind-blown ashes on a single scorching August afternoon. the high priests laid the exact foundations for this devastating collapse, at the precise moment they chose political convenience over undeniable truth. Imagine standing helpless before the smoking ashes of an empire you piously believed was eternal. 40 years after Caiaphas and the religious leaders betrayed Jesus, the devastating prophecy that Christ pronounced on the Mount of Olives was fulfilled with frightening precision. He wept openly over the city, warning that enemies would build trenches, surround them, and leave not one stone upon another. In 70 AD, Roman soldiers literally dismantled the colossal stones of the temple, one by one, to recover the melted gold that had seeped into the crevices during the fire. The high priest's earthly and glorious legacy was completely annihilated. The golden lampstand and the sacred vessels were taken to Rome as war trophies. But what about the legacy of the Galilean man they crucified? The message that emerged from that upper room in Acts 1 has crossed millennia and borders. It has been translated into thousands of languages, whispered in dark prison cells, and etched into the soul of humanity. The religious elite tried to bury the truth under a heavy stone, but the final victory belongs to the empty tomb. The power that truly changes history resides not in those who orchestrate executions or pay bribes, but in those who carry life. The fall of Caiaphas teaches us that what destroys a life or a nation always begins in the heart. Have you ever faced a moment when all seemed lost, only to discover a new beginning? What do you think is the greatest internal enemy a person can carry today? Tell me in the comments. I want to read every response. If this journey touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video so more people can know the backstories of history.